Good evening, everyone. I'm Maria Karafilis, the Director of the American Communities Program, and I'm delighted to see everyone here, and I'm very honored to have Mr. Leyson as our guest this evening. The American Communities Program is an initiative jointly funded by Cal State Los Angeles and the National Endowment for the Humanities, whose mission is to explore the formation of American identities and cultures. To find out more about us and our upcoming events, you can access the ACP webpage from the College of Letters website, and also you can check out our Facebook page. I'd like to take a minute to thank the other campus organizations that are co-hosting tonight's events, the Cross-Cultural Centers and the Department of History. And I'd also like to extend a very special thank you to the Fold family who are here tonight, and their generosity helped make this evening's event possible. And I'd like to introduce Brian Fold, who would like to say a few words before Dr. Cheryl Coos, Chair of the Department of History, introduces Mr. Leyson. Again, thank you for coming, and I look forward to a wonderful and intellectually stimulating evening. Thank you.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be involved in this, and when Sharon Chang from the Cultural History Department here contacted me, I just felt so honored and to have this opportunity. And I quite honestly didn't even know that Mr. Leyson was here in Los Angeles. When I found out that he graduated from the university here and went on to become a teacher here in our city, and has been here as long as he has. It was quite a shock, quite frankly, to know that someone of this stature is here amongst us. But I just want to comment on one aspect of this that was kind of serendipitous to me. My father is still with us, not here tonight, but he's 87 years old, and he grew up here in Boyle Heights. And we had a family market here, and actually three of his brother's children are here with us tonight. They had 11. He had 11 brothers and sisters, but three of his brother's children are here with us tonight, and grandchildren. So it's several generations of Folds. And our family had a market on Brooklyn Avenue here in Boyle Heights called Folds Market. And it was interesting, I just found out that Mr. Leyson has been to Folds Market when he was growing up here in this community. So it's just an honor to be part of this and to bring my family here and have the opportunity to share Mr. Leyson's story with you all. So enjoy it, and thank you very much.
Good evening. There it is. Okay. Before I begin, I, in my capacity as the chair of the History Department and as a modern European historian, would like to thank the American Communities Project and the Fold family for making this event of such great and historical importance happen tonight, and for bringing our speaker here to Cal State LA. 80 years ago, in the wake of the crash of the U.S. stock market in October of 1929, a mere month after our speaker was born, Germany was a country in disarray. Millions of people were out of work, inflation was skyrocketing, and people were paralyzed out of fear. Out of the chaos rose Adolf Hitler, a fear-mongering demagogue who preyed on people's worst impulses and fears. Hitler and his Nazis promised Germany a return to an idealized past by blaming its problems on scapegoats, primarily Jews, socialists, and communists. After becoming chancellor in January of 1933, Hitler and his Nazi followers embarked on a plan for a 1,000-year Reich, an empire, that would span the continent of Europe, that sought to purify first the country and then the whole of Europe of those elements he deemed undesirable, excuse me, and identified as impediments to his vision of a master race: Jews, the mentally and physically challenged, homosexuals, people of color, and political dissenters. Born in 1929, Leon Leyson and his 4 siblings grew up in a small Polish town as these storm clouds gathered across the border in Germany. On September 1st, 1939, his idyllic life in the peaceful town of Narewka was shattered as the Nazis invaded Poland as part of its carefully crafted plan of domination, and World War II began. The Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was over in less than 6 weeks, but the Leysons' lives and those of millions of Jews in Poland and throughout Europe would never be the same. The family was forced to move from their home and herded with many others into the Jewish ghetto of Krakow. It was while in the Krakow ghetto that Mr. Leyson's father and brother began working for the German businessman Oskar Schindler in his enamelware factory. Over time, Schindler used bribes and political connections to increase his workforce, and the 13-year-old Leon was brought by his father to work in Schindler's factory. He was the youngest. The timing of this was crucial, because by 1942, Hitler's final solution, the extermination phase of his war against the Jews, was in full swing, and the death camps, like Auschwitz, were fully operational. Schindler saved 1,200 Jews from certain deportation and death with his list that protected them. As a result, Mr. Leyson's father, mother, 1 brother, and sister survived the war with him. Sadly, his 2 eldest brothers did not. By the time the European war ended in May 1945, approximately 6 million Jews had perished, 3 to 4 million from Poland alone. Mr. Leyson, almost 16 years old, lived in a displaced persons camp for 3 years in Germany before migrating to the United States with his family. He joined the U.S. Army and served in the Korean War. Having settled in Los Angeles, he first attended Los Angeles City College and then graduated from Cal State Los Angeles, then LA State College, in 1958. A beloved high school industrial arts teacher, he taught at Huntington Park High School for 39 years before retiring. He is married to his wife Liz and has 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Following the release of Steven Spielberg's film Schindler's List in 1993, Mr. Leyson dedicated himself to educating society about the Holocaust through his moving story, which we will hear tonight. To that end, he is on the advisory board at Chapman University with the Rogers Center for Holocaust Education. As U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer said after meeting Mr. Leyson in 2004 and hearing his story, said, "Mr. Leyson is a living example of the good in human nature, as exemplified by Oskar Schindler. But his story is also a bitter reminder that we should never forget the evil that took the lives of 6 million of his fellow Jews. Mr. Leyson's work today to educate our children, and I might add, to educate all of us, about the Holocaust is a service to humanity we must never forget. Never again." Leon Leyson is also a living example of why we as a global society must remember the past, study history, and learn from it to avoid the mistakes and the tragedies of the past in the quest to build a humane and just future. It is with great honor that I introduce to you and welcome back home to Cal State Los Angeles, Mr. Leon Leyson.
For somebody who hadn't spoken about his experiences for the first 40 years in this country, to come here to the school where I graduated and became a teacher, it is just unbelievable honor. And to have you come and listen, and that's an additional plus. I once tried to be smart and told an audience that it was an evening and they came to listen, and I said something, "There must not be anything on TV tonight, you guys are all here." And somebody in the back stood up and said, "Ah, yes, there is, but we have TiVo." And as far as the introductions are concerned, not being a public, you know that I'm not a public speaker. You're going to find that out pretty soon. But somebody once asked me how to introduce me, and I said, I don't know. Just tell the audience my name, and then tell them that I survived the Holocaust. And then when I came to this country, I became a teacher and taught in the LA Unified School District for 39 years. So this man got up and said, here is Leon Leyson. He survived the Holocaust in 39 years of the LA Unified School District. Of course, the 39 years of the LA Unified School District was my distinct honor to be a teacher in the LA Unified for 39 years. And so you all know we're going to start my story from in reverse. I came to this school after spending 2 years at City College. In those days, in the dark ages, the State College was adjacent to City College. There was in a bungalow there, and so it was a natural transition from Los Angeles City College to Los Angeles State College, and so I spent 2 years at Los Angeles City College, and then transferred to Cal State Los Angeles now. But it was a very difficult transition, you know, for somebody like me who came to this country without really having an educational background. That is, I learned a lot of things during that period of time, that during the war and after, but my formal education was actually interrupted when I was 10 years old. And so, as I said, I learned a lot of stuff since then. And when I was drafted in the Army, I learned a lot of English that I couldn't use later on after I got home. But it was okay because, you know, when you need to know these words when you hit your thumb with a hammer. In any case, I came back and I was accepted in the Los Angeles City College, which was something that could never happen, could have never happened to me in any other country in the world. When I was interviewed and the consular found out my background and wanted to know where I went to high school, and you know, I went through all of that and finally said, well, with your background, we need industrial arts teachers, and here are the courses you should take, and if you can pass them, you can continue. Quintessential American attitude. If you can do it, do it. You don't care. You know, your background's fine, you know, never mind that. Just take these courses, and if you can pass, you could do the work, you can continue. So I'll report to you today that I passed them with better than a C average, and continued. And then this is something, as I said, could never have happened anyplace else. And then to be transferred to Los Angeles State College, you know, I take a little exam, and I was lucky. I was really fortunate. I encountered nothing but help and assistance from every direction. When I came here, everything was new. I was playing catch-up the whole time. And there were all kinds of people who were offering assistance. This has been my experience in this country ever since I got here. So I've been a lucky person, lucky to have survived the Holocaust, and lucky to have come to this country. And I was, you know, you're looking at the most fortunate human being on this planet. But to get back to my origin, actually I came from a small town in northeastern Poland, and where I spent the first 9 years of my life. My father went to work in Krakow and eventually brought his family to Krakow. So there were 4 brothers and a sister in our family. We all came to Krakow and started this, coming from the town, from a small town like mine, to Krakow, it was like going to a whole different country. And for the first time I experienced running water and big buildings and streetcars and all these things that were not in existence in that small town where I came from. And so we had our extended family lived in this town, and they remained there while we moved. And so I started this wonderful new life in the big city. You know, just started school and all these things that are things were looking up. A year later, Germany invaded Poland, and everything for me changed. I went from a young boy looking forward to a wonderful life in a big city to an enemy of the state. Someone like me had to be eliminated in order for this country of Germany to be a great nation. Which is unbelievable. And you know, of course, they've already started their campaign against the Jewish people in their own country even before they invaded Poland. But to us, it was something that happened in the distance. And I was, at the time, you know, it was 1938, during the Kristallnacht, everybody knows about that. You know, I was just taking cues from adults, you know, they were saying things like, these are horrible things are happening out there, way out there somewhere. And they've already started to experiment with eliminating some of their own, the handicapped and the undesirables, to so on. But when they came to, they came to Poland, invaded Poland, and you know, my parents remembered the Germans from World War I. People my parents' age remember the Germans from World War I. They invaded Poland then, occupied it for 4 years, and when they lost the war, they left and everything went back to normal. So the constant refrain was, oh, well, anytime they had a restriction against the Jewish people announced, they said, well, it's something we can live with, the war's going to be not going to last very long, and everything's going to go back to normal as soon as the war is over, and so on. And so just to give you an idea, when you think about, in retrospect, we know what had happened, and you know what they did, and the end result was going to be, but we didn't know it then. And so to us, looking at it, looking forward, not in the rearview mirror, it was some ridiculous restrictions. You know, I was a 10-year-old boy, and they announced that Jews who go to the parks, and Krakow had nice, beautiful parks, because it used to be the capital of Poland when Poland was a kingdom, so it's a beautiful city. So Jews who go to the parks are not permitted to sit on the benches. Can you imagine that? Yeah, stupid, you know, I didn't pay much attention to that. And then little by little, Jews were not allowed to go to the parks altogether. Each time it was an official announcement. Little by little. Of course, as I said, now, in retrospect, we know it was a series of events that where they wanted to marginalize the Jewish people. A group of people to be marginalized, step by step by step. And so, my father, for example, who came to Krakow because of his work, he was a tool die maker, and he lost his job, he got arrested for no reason, and he was gone for about 3 months. When he came back, he was not exactly the same person that left. You know, he was a proud man who brought his family to the big city just because of his skills, and they came and arrested him in our house, beat him up, and took him away. And so his job was gone. So when he came back, he didn't have a job. And so during that same period, young officers, German officers, came to Poland to make their fortune. Young people, young counterintelligence officers, people who distinguished themselves in the service of the Nazi regime, came to Poland, and it was a good place to come because the Nazis were confiscating Jewish property. By the way, they also confiscated non-Jewish property as well. You know, they were not too shy about confiscating anybody's property if they wanted it. And so one of those people who came to Krakow was a man by the name of Oskar Schindler. He came to Krakow to make money. And so he got a factory to run, which happened to be right across the street from my father's pre-war job, for which he came to Krakow in the first place. And so he found out that there's this Jewish man who doesn't have a job, and he's a craftsman, and he needed people like him, so he hired him. My father turned out to be one of the first Jews that Schindler hired, and as everybody knows here, they eventually hired more and more people because it was profitable. He didn't have to pay us. But you know, there was a great advantage in having a job in a place like Schindler's Company, because as the Nazis continued with their campaign of marginalizing the Jews step by step by step, first in the parks, we couldn't sit on the benches, then we couldn't go to the parks. Then my favorite streetcars, I was really fascinated by streetcars. You know, I came from a place where everything was horse-drawn, you know, and suddenly there are these streetcars right in the middle of the street, and I was, 9 years old. And so, when I got some friends who were my age, we played games on these streetcars because they had platforms on either end. You can get on the streetcar on either end. They looked a little bit like the cable cars in San Francisco. And and there was a conductor that sold tickets. So we'd watch to see where he was, and we'd get on the platform furthest away from him, and then ride a few stops, and then when you got really close, we'd get off and get on the other platform and go a few more stops. We're just kids, And it was just one of those. I was living the life of the big city. Well, during one of those steps that they implied, they decided that Jews who take transportation, take the streetcar, had to sit in the back. They strung a rope right in the middle of the streetcar. Of course, it ruined my game. And Jews had to sit in the back, and had a big sign on the side of the streetcar that said, "Für Juden, für Nicht-Juden," for Jews, for non-Jews. But that didn't last very long. After a while, the rope went down, the sign went down, and Jews were not allowed to take public transportation altogether. Step by step by step. About the same time, though, in about 1941, they decided that not only are Jews supposed to be separated and identified, but they also couldn't live together with the rest of the population. Before that, they had all these different steps, and eventually we had to wear armbands. Jews who went out on the street had to wear an armband to identify them by their religious preference. When you think about it, to identify yourself by your religious preference is perfectly fine. If you want to wear a cross or a Star of David or whatever you want to wear around your neck or on your ears or whatever, it's honored in this country. I think it's a good thing. But when you are made to identify yourself by your religious preference, that's a whole different thing. And so, little by little, even our friends, you think, did it work? Of course it worked. Even our friends, my father's friends who've known each other before, they came to Krakow at the same time, and so they're buddies. They started to distance themselves from us, little by little. We were the other. So eventually, as they decided to establish the ghetto in Krakow. The Jews were not only had to be separated or identified, but they also couldn't live with the rest of the population. So they jammed in the Jews from Krakow in a small area of the city. And the Christians, they surrounded a small area with high walls, about 12-foot walls, and the non-Christians had to move out and Jews moved in. And so the number of Jews that moved in were about 3 times as many. And so we were crowded, we were jammed into this small area. We had to share rooms with other families and so on. And during that period of time, if I were to tell you my life in the ghetto, it would really take too long, because it was just day after day after day of the same thing. I was always looking for food. I was always hungry, because the Nazis did not allow too many provisions in the ghetto. And not only that, but the shortages of food began all over Poland right after the Nazis invaded Poland. They helped themselves to Polish wealth and shipped it to Germany, and so there were shortages. But in the ghetto it was even worse. So my memory of the ghetto is I was hungry. I was always hungry. I could never remember having enough food, and I was always frightened, because the Nazis who operated the ghetto treated us as the way they were taught to treat us, as subhuman. And so it was not unusual to somebody to get beaten up on the street for not getting off the sidewalk to let a German pass, or even shot. So I experienced all of those things. I was shot at, I was chased, I was beaten, I was looking for food all the time. To the Nazis, we were the Jews who lived in the ghetto. That's they looked at us with Nazi eyes, and they knew in the ghetto there were these Jews. But in truth, if they could see us with normal eyes, you could see that in this ghetto lived all kinds of people. They were tall and short and smart and not so smart, better off than others, professors, people of all walks of life who were Jewish. So during that period, when you think about did the Jews resist, or they were accused of not resisting the whole thing and just going off and letting ourselves be killed. That's not true. We resisted. Everyone resisted. When I looked around to see if I can find some food and run an errand for somebody and get a slice of bread, that's resistance. When we formed little schools in the back of buildings that the Nazis couldn't see, and people would come and give lectures and teach and sing songs and tell jokes. You can imagine at a time like this, you don't sit around telling jokes, but it's all a way of keeping up your humanity, and it's all a way of resisting. Just so that, oh, hey. And you don't have to see me, that's okay. You don't have to see me. If I were, one of the, just speaking of jokes, I must tell you one of them. Just so you'll know that we were trying to survive any way we could. There was a story about this Nazi who had been roaming around the eastern part of Europe and shooting people with his pistol, just on a daily, regular basis. And so he got tired of it, and it was no fun anymore, so he had this Jew he was going to shoot. And you can still hear me, right? Even if you can't see me? Okay. And so he told this man, the Nazi said to the man that he had one eye made out of glass. And so if he could recognize which one is glass, then he could let him live. Because no one could tell his real eye from his glass eye, because it was made by this terrific German technician, and no one could tell the difference. But if he could, he let him live. So the guy looks in his eyes and finally points to one and said, "This one." And of course it was the right one. And so the Nazi was astounded and said, "How did you know this? Nobody ever guessed before." He said, "Well, I looked into each one of your eyes, and in one of them I noticed a little glimmer of humanity. I knew that was glass." Trying to keep up the spirits, So about the same time that the Nazis created the ghetto in Krakow, and by the way, my father, who had a job in Schindler's company, was able to leave the ghetto to go to work. He had a special permit, and so there was an advantage because he could smuggle in little pieces of food in his pockets on the way home. He left some of his possessions with one of his old buddies from before the war, and little by little he'd ask them to trade it for food, and he would smuggle in little pieces. You can't smuggle in a lot in your pockets, but this is how we lived from day to day. And I was always looking around for food everywhere I went. About the same time, when the ghetto was started, this is 1941, Germany broke their agreement with the Soviet Union. As you remember, they had an agreement with the Soviet Union at the beginning of the war. Russians occupied the eastern part of Poland. And so they broke their agreement and invaded the rest of Eastern Europe, went through that area very fast, and behind the armies, the invading armies, they sent special troops. They called them Einsatzgruppen. These troops, their job was to find Jews who lived in these small towns like mine that I came from and where my whole extended family lived, and murder them. And as many times as I've told about that, it always gives me the same feeling. It's just chill right down my spine. Can you imagine an order, an army battalion of soldiers, and they were told, here are the weapons, and this is what you need to do. You go to these towns and find Jews and murder them. So 2 months after that second invasion, they came through my hometown, surrounded it, drove the Jewish people out of the homes, down to the edge of the forest, which is nearby, murdered the men that day. They were buried in a common grave, which is marked today. The women and children were held in the barn for several more days, and they too disappeared, so we don't know where they're buried. One day maybe they will still find it, because they are still finding graves, common graves from that period. As a result of the action of that one battalion of soldiers, everyone who was related to me in Poland, other than those of us who were in Krakow at the time, died. That includes my oldest brother, who was 19 when the war began. He outran the German panzers, ended up with his grandparents on the Soviet side until 41, and he too was rounded up in that particular roundup, died at age 21. Back in Krakow, after roaming around the eastern part of Poland with these battalions of soldiers, the Nazis decided that things were not going fast enough. If they were going to carry out their plan, shooting people with bullets. It was not fast enough. You know, they call this period, you know, those people who do research and do scholarly work in the Holocaust, you know, like to name periods so that you could identify them. This period is called, I found out recently, is called the Holocaust by bullets. And so, back in Krakow, since as I said, the shooting people one at a time, but the battalions were not going fast enough, the Nazis decided that using their good German technology and science, they built factories all over Poland to murder people en masse. You know them as death camps. But when you think about those death camps, you should think about these in a different way. And I always have a difficulty trying to explain what you must think about when you think about these death camps, instead of just saying, oh, they were all over Poland. They didn't just happen there. They were built by scientists, smart German engineers, designers, craftsmen, educated human beings. Imagine maybe they were sitting around a mahogany table and deciding how big the crematoria should be and how big the gas chamber should be and where it should be located and how to supply the factories with human beings. And just all of that had to be done by smart people. Educated, smart, but evil. And so they began their transports. They began their transports out of the first transport that left Krakow. The Nazis, you know, played games, and they kind of enjoyed themselves, I guess, because they announced, on the first one, they announced that there was going to be a train out at the railroad station, and anybody who wants to get on it could get on the train, leave the ghetto and get on the train, and then they'll be taken to the countryside where they would get fresh air and jobs, and also alleviate the congestion in the ghetto, which made very good sense. Except they lied a little bit. They were not going to get fresh air out in the countryside. They were going to be gassed and burned. So those of you who saw Schindler's List actually saw a movie in transport in the movie, depicted very accurately actually, and happened to be the one where Schindler discovered that his accountant was on this transport. And so he went to the railroad station to rescue him. And if you remember that, how many of you have seen Schindler's List? Oh, see, you know my whole story. And so Schindler went to rescue his accountant. And so as they went through all the railroad cars, they called his name, Stern. Finally they found Stern. Well, Schindler got Stern off the train, and Stern survived with us at the end on Schindler's List. But what you didn't see in the movie, and the movie can't show you everything, is that when Schindler was looking for his accountant, he saw my then second oldest brother, who was taken on this particular same transport. He saw him there, and he offered to get him off the train. But my brother declined to get off the train because he was there with his girlfriend. And Schindler couldn't get her off. So he decided that he would stay with her. And that was the last decision that he had made. They both ended up in a place called Belzec, a death camp. Well, that left us with my sister, now the oldest, my brother David next to me, and me in the ghetto. As Schindler was increasing his workforce, my father asked Schindler to add my brother next to me, who was 2 years older than I. And so he too was hired by Schindler, and he too could go to work in Schindler's company, then bring something home with him in his pockets. So that helped, all that helped. And eventually, of course, transport after transport was removed from the ghetto, and the ghetto was going to be closed. In the meantime, the Nazis had built a concentration camp near the factory, near Krakow, near the camp. And so it's called Ploshów. If you saw the movie, you remember the commandant shooting people from the balcony and all that. Everyone in that camp, every officer in that camp, every operator who operated this camp did the same thing on a daily basis. But in the movie, can only show you so much. Well, those people who worked in places like Schindler's company were transferred out of the ghetto into this concentration camp. And so my father and my brother went to live there. My sister went to work in another factory like Schindler's called Kabelwerk, and she left. So my mother and I were the only two in our family left during the time when the ghetto was actually going to be closed and everyone was going to be transferred to Ploshów, to the concentration camp. You can see my track, the road to Schindler's company was long and treacherous. It was, my life was threatened every day of my life then. If I were to tell you all the different times when I had done something other than what I did, I wouldn't have survived. It would take much, much longer. But so when the ghetto was being closed, my mother and I were the only ones in our family left in the ghetto. And the Nazis announced that those people who were left, they were going to be transferred to Ploshów, to the concentration camp, and they should line up according to the factories or the workshops where they worked. They ran these workshops in the ghetto with different things like making uniforms for the army and all kinds of crafts, brush making. I got a job in a brush factory actually after a while. So anyway, we were supposed to line up according to the places where we worked, and we would be escorted under guard to Ploshów, to the concentration camp. So when it was my turn, I lined myself up with my group, and when it was my turn to leave, I got just about where the gate was. There was a guard standing there, pulled me out, and he said, "You come later." I knew that was not a good thing. At that time, learned a lot of how the Nazis operated. So I went back where people were still lining up. There was still a commotion there. My friends my age were not allowed out. And so we huddled up, little kids, and trying to decide what to do. They decided they were going to go hide. And that's because we'd hidden once before, and we escaped one of the transports that way. We hid in a little attic in the back of our building there, and we survived a transport. So they were going to do that again, but I decided not to. I don't want you to think I was smart not to do that, but actually I saw my mother leave with her group just ahead of us, and I was going to be by myself, the last one, alone in the ghetto. I didn't want to be there alone, no matter where my parents were, is where I wanted to go. And so I lined myself up with another group. They really didn't know whether I belonged to this group or that group. And finally, I was pulled out a couple more times, and one time the guard wasn't looking, and I made it. I made it out of the ghetto into this concentration camp, which is like out of the frying pan into the fire. If the ghetto was the most horrible place on earth, the camp was something altogether different. When I looked in there, I first got into the gate, people were yelling, dogs barking, barracks as far as the eye could see, nothing familiar. And you know, to be honest, I knew from there I wasn't going to go anywhere. That would be my last stop. So I spent the rest of that year in this concentration camp experiencing all the things that you've seen in the movie and then some. And as I said, the movie can't show you everything. These Nazis would roam our ranks every morning and shoot people in the morning, beat them up for hours of standing there, and then they'd take us out and take us to work in different details. In the meantime, however, Schindler, who had quite a few people working for him, and they had to be escorted from the camp to his factory, was able to persuade the authorities to let him build a sub-camp, which was right next to the factory. So that his employees could just roll out of the barracks, go to work, and then go back without guards or anything. It was just right next to the factory. Now, he says this is where Schindler began to spend some of his money. You know, he had to bribe some people to let him do this. But in any case, he built a camp, and my father and my brother went to live there. And eventually, so after the camp was built, Schindler was adding more people to his factory. And so there was about a small Schindler's List, about 30 to 35 people who were going to be transferred from the concentration camp Plaszow to Schindler's subcamp. My mother was on the list, my father and I was on the list. My father asked Schindler to put us on it. You know, my father having been the first Jewish employee that Schindler hired, I think they had some kind of a relationship. I know that everyone who was on Schindler's List thinks that they had some kind of a special personal relationship with Schindler. But I think in my father's case it was real. Each time he asked Schindler for something, he complied. So when he asked Schindler to put my mother and me on the list to be transferred, he did. So about a few days before we were supposed to be escorted out, I discovered with my bad luck, good luck, that I wasn't going to go. Somebody crossed my name off the list, and my mother was going to leave and I was not. And so, you know, I was a little kid still and tried to figure out or ask people who crossed my name off, or nobody would give me an answer, and they just kind of, you know, shine me off and say, yeah, you have a job there in a brush factory. They restarted the factory again. So on the day that they were going to leave, I snuck away from my job in the brush factory and went to see my mother off. You know, I was going to be left alone in that camp. If that had happened, my chances for survival would have been zero by myself in this camp. But so as I was walking along, nobody stopped me. Normally, you know, if you walk along without any purpose in a place like that, you could get killed, if not just beaten up. But anyway, nobody stopped me, nobody even saw me, I don't know, I was invisible. And I was there right where they were, I could hear them talking, and so I can't tell you how the last few steps that I took, but I found myself in front of this Nazi officer. He was about a huge, monstrous guy, you know. Of course, I was little, so he may not have been quite as big, but when I looked straight at him, I could see his belt buckle, so he's not small. And not, you know, plenty mean. And one of those that would just roam the ranks every morning shooting people. In any case, I told him that I was on the list and somebody crossed my name off. And then I said, my mother's on the list and she's in this group. Can you imagine I'm speaking to this person who doesn't even think I'm human? And then I said, yeah, I'm a dumb little kid, you know. And then I said, And my father and my brother are there already. Even then I thought, oh, I should never have said that. You know, there's no telling what he might do. But what he did was he looked at the list, he had his assistant show him the list, looked at me, and grunted, like that. Pointed me to the group. I jumped in and stood there what I thought was a long time, but it probably wasn't. Because I was worried that they might change their mind, you know, because they were he was talking to his assistant about something, the assistant was saying something to him, and I was worried. And then it seemed like a long time, but it probably, as I said, it probably wasn't very long. And then the group started to move, the gate opened up, and I could breathe. And I ended up in Schindler's company. When I got there, they tried us out on different jobs in the factory, and they showed me an operation to do on one of the machines. It's called a lathe. And I didn't know too much about it, but I used to see my father work sometimes, you know, before the war, and I knew where the handles were, you know. So when they showed me how to do something, I could actually do it. So they said, okay, this is your job. So I used to spend 12-hour shifts working in Schindler's company on this lathe. And during that period, of course, I was short, so I used to stand on a box, about 8 inches tall, upside-down box, so I could reach the controls better, you know. And so I used to stand there working 12-hour shifts, a lot of it nights. And Schindler had a habit, of course, he entertained in his office a lot, you know. He just had people coming in almost every night, had parties in his office. And afterwards, when they all left, he would come downstairs to the factory floor and walk around slowly and speak to people. Just, you could tell the difference there between a human being like Schindler, who did not accept the Nazi ideology. You could tell by the way he looked at us, the way he spoke to us, and he had a little twinkle in his eye. It wasn't blank like some of the Nazis' eyes. And you know, can you imagine he'd stop and talk to me sometimes. And I was standing on the box running this machine, and he'd ask me things like, how am I doing, how many pieces I've made. You know, he wasn't really interested in that. He just wanted to make human contact with this kid. And then afterwards, you know, sometimes after these visits, when I went to get my ration of food, the next day, I would discover that Schindler left word that I should receive 2 rations. Can you imagine somebody who's been partying all night and, you know, apparently didn't have a hangover because he could remember to go see the person who handed the rations out to tell him to give this kid 2 rations. That is pretty remarkable already. And so when you think about the kind of human being that Schindler was, you have to judge his character by the times then, not by the times today. Today, you know, somebody like Schindler would be considered a good CEO who takes care of his employees, you know, and make sure they have retirement, or they have health care, whatever, and, you know, stuff like that. But in those days, the law of the land, the government policy was to murder Jews. Saving Jews was against the law and punishable by concentration camps or worse. So what Schindler was doing was not only a dangerous thing to do, but a heroic thing to do. And so this happened quite often, you know. He would come by and talk to me, talk to my brother behind me who worked on the same kind of machine, and, you know, he was just a special kind of human being. Even when we were doing production work, you know, when I started out, all I did know was production work, you know. They showed me how to do one operation and I could do that, and they showed me another operation, I could do that, and so on. And one day, I was caught. Schindler came through factory floor as he usually did, and I was caught away from my workstation watching another machine being set up, different tooling and stuff like that. And as I was looking to see what they were doing, and I was kind of interested in all this mechanical stuff, you know. And Schindler came by, and I could tell he's there. You could always tell Schindler's in the factory, even if you didn't see him, because he smoked these cigarettes. You could tell, and it's wafted all over the factory. And so I got stuck. I didn't want to go running back to my machine, so I was just standing there, and he ran right by me, didn't say anything. The next thing I knew, Schindler left orders that my brother and I should be transferred from this production work area to the tool making area. This thing, you know, this man thought maybe we had a future. We were not working there until we died, that we had, you know, something to live for. In any case, so we were transferred, my brother and I were transferred, and so this was almost a daily occurrence where Schindler would come to the factory floor and he'd order an extra ration of food. Sometimes he'd stop at my father's workstation and put his arm on his shoulder, which is a Nazi sin. You know, put an arm on a Jew's shoulder. And told him, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. You know, even if he didn't really know exactly that everything was going to be all right, but he felt like he should say that. Sometimes he would leave a half pack of cigarettes on my father's workstation. Not on mine, I mean, I was a kid, but on my father's workstation, he'd leave a half pack of cigarettes, sort of by accident on purpose. You know, in those days, you could get a slice of bread for a cigarette, you know. It was really like a medium of exchange. Anyway, this is kind of a human being Schindler was. As I said earlier, probably most people, all people really, who were on Schindler's List think of that they had some special relationship with him because of the kind of human being he was, you know. He looked you right in the eye, spoke in complete sentences. That was not true with the Nazis. Nazis always barked these orders at us like Haus, schnell, los, you know, stuff like that. You know, after all, we're not human. You don't talk to your dog like this. Of course, maybe you do here, but those days you just, you know. So, in any case, the war was going badly for the Germans on the Eastern Front. Pretty soon, the Russians were going to be in Krakow. And so people like Schindler, who had factories and had Jews working for them, closed their factories, sent their Jewish workers back to Plaszow, took their money and ran. Schindler decided that he was going to do something else. You know, honestly, when I heard the rumor that Schindler was going to dismantle the machinery, ship the factory to Czechoslovakia, mostly where he came from, and then bring his employees with him, I knew he was no way that he's going to do that. There's no way he would be able to accomplish something like that. And even, you know, when he proposed this, they actually offered him other employees, you know, like they told him, you don't have to drag these people over from here to Czechoslovakia. We got a whole bunch of prisoners in Czechoslovakia. We'll give you all you want. But he insisted that he needed those people, these experts. And so he was able to persuade him to let him transfer the factory, and eventually we were going to be, you know, those people who were going to stay and dismantle the factory machinery were going to stay, and there was another group of people. He couldn't keep all his employees during that period because nothing was being manufactured. So he had to send some people back to Plaszow. So somebody made up a list of who's going to stay to dismantle the factory machinery and who is going to be sent back to Plaszow. When the list came out, my father, my brother, and I were on the list to leave. My mother was on the list to stay. I don't know who made up that list, but it wasn't Schindler. And so we were already lined up in rows of 4, waiting to be transferred back to Ploshov. And so this time, however, I wanted to get his attention. I couldn't, so I started to move out of my row to the edge of the group, so when he got to that side, I could get his attention. And so when I was doing that, a guard saw me and walked up behind me and hit me with his rifle butt. But I had this thermos bottle that my German family who came to live with us in the ghetto, they were taken away on one of the transports. But before the man left, he gave me this thermos bottle, old-fashioned thermos bottle. So I still had it. I had it full of water. When the guard hit me, he broke his thermos bottle. Made a big crash. Everybody looked in my direction. Schindler looked. So I called out to him. I told him that my father, my brother, and I are being sent away. He ordered the 3 of us out of that group immediately and told us to go join the group that was staying in a different location. He saved our lives at that point. Our chances for surviving would have been very, very small. Those people who were sent away ended up in places like Buchenwald and Mauthausen and places where they carried rocks up and down a hillside, where more than half of those people did not survive the war. In our case, the 3 of us, we would not have made it. And so he did a wonderful thing. He saved our lives. But he did something more remarkable, so you'll know what kind of a character Schindler was. Once he ordered us out and told us to go join the other group, he went there first, ahead of us. He found my mother there, who was on the list to stay in the first place, and told her not to worry, that we were on the way back. Now this is what you might call beyond the call of duty. Tells you something about the man and the human being. To think about the fact that this woman is all by herself over there, worried about what's going to happen to her husband, the 2 children. I better go tell her not to worry. That's pretty good. For that reason, I think that Schindler was a genuine hero. And, he was not just a human being who just did a good thing, but in those days, it was heroic. In any case, we actually ended up and were all then transferred back to Ploshov to await the transport to Schindler's new location. And my sister, who worked in another company like Schindler's, was sent back to Ploshov. And my father asked Schindler to add my sister to the list of women, which he did. So my sister ended up on Schindler's list at the end with her mother. And as you know from the movie that when the women went on the way to Schindler's company, they were diverted to Auschwitz. And when people were received in Auschwitz, there was a man standing there and who decided who should live and who should die. And he would point to the left and the right and so on, So when my sister approached him, she was 17 or 18 years old, young girl, strong, to live, my mother to die. So she was already in the barracks awaiting the gas chamber when Schindler found out that not all the women on his list were being sent to his factory. He went and spent more money and bribed more people and insisted that every one of these women have to be sent to him because they were all experts. Like my mother, who was a cleaning lady. She was an expert. When I think about it, she was an expert cleaning lady. If you ever saw her floor on Friday night, how clean it was. She was an expert, no doubt. And so at that point, my mother, as I said, was taken out of the barracks and brought back to Schindler's group. And as hard as it is for me to tell you this, I want you to know that this happened in 1944. In 1944, my mother was 42. Already too old, worthless, good for nothing. At 42. Imagine. My daughter is 42. If I think about the amount of suffering that we underwent during that period, my parents compared to the children, there's no comparison. They suffered so much more as parents than we did as children, even though we experienced the same things. But for the parents, it was devastating. Now, I wasn't this smart until my children were 12 and 14, and I was looking at them thinking, how would I ever handle something like this? Honestly, I couldn't have. You have to be really, really strong. And when I first came to Plaszow, my mother was already there on the women's side. And so, being a little kid, and it's hard to tell whether I was male or female, I snuck through the wires and I found my mother. I went to see her. And she was so happy to see me. And immediately started pushing me out the door because, she wanted to protect me. I would get in trouble, which is true. And so, before she got me out the door, she reached behind the rags that she was sleeping on and pulled out a little piece of bread about the size of a walnut and gave it to me. That's the best she could do. And probably the last thing she had. So for my parents, it was much, much harder to experience that than it was for us, the children, even though we experienced the same thing. Somebody's going to have to tell me when we run out of time here. I think we have already, right? Let me just what do you say? I don't see anybody asleep yet. Now, I just want to point out to you that once we were there, the last few months of the war, it was most difficult. Schindler, even though he continued with the same habit of visiting after hours and actually offering me a little piece of bread every once in a while, and ordering that I should not work nights because he didn't think a kid should be working nights, and so we did all kinds of things like that during that period. And when the Russians are going to be liberating this area, Schindler decided that he couldn't stay. He wanted to leave and end up in the Allied side. And so he was escorted by a group of us from the camp to make sure he was safe. But as you know from the movie, he was given a ring. It was made from somebody's crown, and it was inscribed inside with a saying from the Talmud. It said, "He who saves one life saves the world entire." And it was a perfect thing, appropriate thing to give Schindler. He saved 1,200 people. But in truth, if you think about it, there's no telling. The activities of Schindler continue on forever. In my case, I have, I'm married. We have 2 children, grown. My daughter has 3 boys. They will have children. My son has a daughter. She will have, it's continued on. It's forever. Whatever he did, it continues on forever. And it's ever expanding. So for that reason, I think that this was quite appropriate to give Schindler a ring with that saying. He who saves one life saves the world entire. And then I want to give you my definition of a hero that I borrowed from Joseph Campbell. He was interviewed, he was talking about mythical heroes, and he gave a definition of a hero, and I thought when I heard it, that fits Schindler perfectly. It goes something like this. A hero is an ordinary human being who does the best of things in the worst of times. And times could not have been worse, and what Schindler did could not have possibly been better. He was just one extraordinary human being. And so, as you know, after the war he didn't do very well. He traveled and went to Israel to visit people who were on his list and came to Los Angeles. 20 years later he came to LA. And so we went to the airport to greet him, and when it was my turn to greet him, I thought maybe I should introduce myself. By that time, it's 20 years later, I was a grown man, I grew, I was as tall as he was. My wife was with me, and so I started to introduce myself, and he interrupted me and he said, "I know who you are. You're a little Leyson." Yeah. And I want to thank you very much. I know you know the rest of the history. My life in this country was just a series of fortunate events, as well as those before the war. Because this is where I really started my new life, right here.
How do you find the history books written comparing to your experience, sir?
I know I shouldn't say this because scholars do research and they put things in boxes, and Roman numerals and so forth. And it's all very well. But when I look at it, I said, there's a whole lot of stuff in between these Roman numerals that doesn't get said or anything because, if you haven't been there, you can't really tell. But I know that people who do research do good work and find details, that I could possibly know. You know what I mean? But as far as life under these conditions, you can't get it in a book. Reading it on a white page with black letters, that's different from seeing somebody like me struggling here to tell you what I was like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. How do you deal with your memories?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a saying in German. It goes, "Überleben das Überleben." It means, how do you survive after having survived? How do you continue your life? And so, it comes to a point where you have a choice. People have a choice to make. Be bitter the rest of your life, which you have a perfect right to be, or you can move forward. That doesn't mean forgetting or forgiving or doing anything of the sort. It means putting that behind and moving forward with your life, which is what I did. I was lucky enough, I had my parents, and so I was not the great hero, but I was able to do this by continuing with, as I said, all I did was, when I came to this country, was trying to learn English and I'm trying not to have an accent, and all these things, and I was busy doing these things because when I came to this country, I spoke no English. And so I started from scratch, and I was busy. I was very busy. So I didn't have time to even think about this. I was moving forward, always.
Yes, up there.
This generation is going to be the last generation that knows people like you who are first-person accounts. What do you want us to tell the coming generations about what happened?
All I can ask for anybody is to tell their next generation they saw somebody who survived the Holocaust. I don't remember what he said, but I saw him standing there struggling, and that's it. It was very hard. And after that, that's the best thing you can do.
Yes.
What are your views and feelings about Germany and German people today?
My feelings about the German people, I have no feelings of any kind to German people. I don't hate them. I don't go around loving them. I love the German language. I'm not that kind of a person. I don't spend my time hating, which I have a good right to do it, but that's counterproductive. And I recognize the fact too, and everybody should, that even though the overwhelming majority of Germans went along with Hitler and his regime and his policies and all this, not everybody did. There were people who actually did not. And I met those people after the war, even. And you can tell the difference between those who went along with the Nazi ideology, and then after the war said, "Well, we didn't know," and those people who said, "Don't say that. We know." So, yeah, I don't feel any special animosity towards the German people as a whole. Besides that, the Nazis treated us as the Jews, and I can't be turning around and do the same thing in reverse, So that's my philosophy. It's easy for me to say because I have a really great life in this country.
Yes.
Over there.
My experience, I was a country student. I was born and raised in Boyle Heights, from Brooklyn Avenue and Flow Street. What kind of fond memories do you have of that community?
I wasn't actually raised in Boyle Heights. When I came to this country, I went to live with my uncle and aunt who brought us here, and they actually lived on 59th Street in Figueroa, near the Coliseum. That was my first experience.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Did your experiences affect how you taught immigrant children for all the years you taught in high school, some of whom experienced some horrible things in the countries from which they came?
And what was your question? Tell me.
How did your experiences in Germany and in Poland affect how you work with children in high school?
Well, in the first place, I was not bringing up my children as a father of a Holocaust father. I didn't teach my students as a Holocaust survivor either. No one in my school knew about my experiences until after the movie came out. I didn't think that was important for me to bring out, even though my activities, the things that I was doing, must have been affected by my experience. That goes without saying. But as far as telling other students about my experiences, I was their teacher and they were my students. As a matter of fact, none of the faculty knew about my experiences either. They used to, every once in a while somebody would recognize that I had an accent, around the lunch table, we sit there and somebody would say, Leon, you have an accent? And I would always say, yes. And then the next question was, where are you from? And I would always say, I'm from the East. No, no one ever followed up on where East.
In the back right here.
I was just wondering, as the years went by and things progressed worse and worse, how did you find hope that there would be an end, or did you ever feel that there was hope, that there would be an end to this, and to keep going, to want to survive?
There were times where it didn't look like there's going to be an end to it. Especially my first appearance, my first vision of the Holocaust, the concentration camp, where the commandant was the one who was shooting people from the balcony, and the life in there was. Once I saw that, I knew that was going to be my last stop, that I wasn't going to go anywhere from there. It was just a very fortunate thing that Schindler had created a sub-camp, and I was able to transfer there. But other than that, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here to tell you my story.
Yes, right here.
How did you and your family decide to come to this country rather than Israel or return to Poland?
Well, my brother and sister, who also survived on Schindler's List, went to Israel. After we left, when the war was over, you've seen the movie, right? And the war is over, and the movie changes from black and white to color, and everyone goes off singing Yerushalayim Shazah. But that didn't happen. We were traumatized. We were standing there. We were like deer in the headlights. What to do now? We didn't have anything. We didn't have no place to go. Nothing. But just to give you another little side of Schindler, just before, a couple of months before the war was over, the warehouses were not guarded very much anymore. Guards were running for their lives and abandoning their stations, and so Schindler got a truck with some people on it, went to one of those warehouses and brought back to camp hundreds of bolts of cloth, all navy blue, and hundreds of bottles of vodka. Brought it into camp, and before he left orders that everyone who leaves the camp, every one of us, should receive a bottle of vodka and a bolt of cloth. So in my case, it was a family of 5. We had 5 bolts of cloth, 5 bottles of vodka, and we didn't know what to do, so we decided, we came from Poland, we go back to Poland. They gave us transportation, and we went back to Krakow. But as it turned out, we were there for a year. My brother and sister went to Czechoslovakia to see if they could settle there, it would be better. It wasn't, so they left and went to Israel. My mother insisted that she at least have one child with her, now that she didn't have any children anymore, so I stayed with them. And so after a year in Poland, we decided to escape Poland and ended up in a displaced persons camp. There we spent 3 years. And during that period, we submitted our name to an organization that did family searches. My mother had a brother and sister who came to this country in the early 1900s. When the first pogroms and the first rioting took place in the eastern part of Europe, they left and came to the United States, and they had their own families here, and they already had found out what happened to their families in Poland, so they assumed that everyone had died, which is close. And then they discovered there were these 3 people in a displaced persons camp that might be related. And they were, and so it turned out to be my mother's brother and sister. When they found that out, they began corresponding with us and started sending us care packages, you know, and we ended up, they ended up bringing us to this country. So in 1949, 3 years later, we ended up in this country, where I began my real life. You know, when I stepped on this soil in this country, I realized I was in a different place altogether. I mean, besides being in a different place, but people and the attitude, the people were helpful immediately. You could see just a different demeanor of people who were willing to help. And they knew we were these three refugees who spoke this foreign language to each other, dressed like foreigners, you know, and they gave us money to spend on a train. We had to go from Boston to Los Angeles on a train, which is a long trip. And so we go to the railroad cars and, you know, the dining car and buy food, and then I didn't know what they said, so I would give them a large enough bill thinking it would cover it, and then put this change in my pocket. I did that a few times, you know, so I ended up with a lot of change in my pocket. So as I was looking at the change, I was holding it in my hand, looking at the coins to see the shape. You know, you're in a foreign country, you want to see what the shape of the coins are. And so a woman sitting not too far from me got out of her seat, sat next to me, pulled out a coin and said, "This is a nickel, put it back. This is a dime, this is a penny, this is a quarter," you know, like that. She was finished, she got up and left. She didn't wait to be thanked, she didn't do anything, she just did that. And she probably didn't remember it the next day. But that was 60 years ago, and I'd always remembered that woman. It was a small kindness, and it's only the beginning of my experience in this country.
One more question.
You know, you had mentioned that once you came here, it was a new world, and you did discuss these things with your students or even your children to live a new life. I assume that you mentioned when the movie came out that's really changed things. Under what circumstance did you first hear about the movie coming out, and then were you concerned how it was going to affect you or not?
Well, when the movie came out, I was not involved in making the movie. I was interviewed though for the Shoah Foundation. But you know, when the movie came out, there was a lot of interest generated in the events, and so somebody called the Spielberg company to find out if there's anybody in Orange County who was on Schindler's List, and they said yes. But so they called me and gave me the reporter's number. And so I've never spoken to a reporter about my experiences, and so I had the number, but I didn't do anything until my wife insisted that, you know, after carrying it for a week, she said, "You have to do something. You have to tell them you're going to do it, you're not going to do it." So I was ready not to do it because I haven't done it before. Well, the reporter was pretty clever. He's a pretty smart kid. He asked me some questions. He said, "Well, you know, I saw the movie," and he wanted to ask me some questions about the movie and about the scenes. And pretty soon he said, "Well, you know, do you mind if I come over to your house and you could tell me more?" And I said, "Yeah, okay. Well, what are you going to say?" So finally, he came over, and then we talked for a while, and then he said, "You know, do you mind if I put my tape recorder here on your coffee table?" I said, "Okay, fine." So he did that, and all of this, you know, I did not anticipate doing an interview. We were just talking, and then he was finished, and he said, "Okay, well, that's great, thank you very much, but wait a minute, do you mind if I take your picture?" So I said, "Okay, you know, take my picture." I thought he was going to whip out a little camera and go click. So he goes to the front door, he said, "Okay, guys, you can come in." I had him waiting over there all the whole time, and so they came in, took a bunch of pictures, and it came out in the Sunday paper, Orange County edition. And when I came to work that Monday, I was attacked by everybody. Oh, why didn't you tell us this? I didn't think anybody'd be interested, And so this is how it began. People found out about from the interview. The rest is history. But I always have difficulty talking about my experiences. Always the same. I always get choked up at the same time. I promise myself not to be a wimp, but it doesn't work.
Well, our time is up, sad to say. Thank you all for being here tonight and witnessing this marvelous piece of history that we've been treated to. So thank you, and thank you, Mr. Leyson.